Well, bonjour, buenas tardes, buongiorno, hello. Mon nom est Paul Dufour. I'm going to moderate this session. For my sins, I've been involved in the advisory committee for the CSPC for the last several years. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. You're in a session here that will talk about, engage in a dialogue about l'avenir, the future, la relève for CSPC, and we're going to bring you up to date with some information, some intelligence that we've gleaned from members of our illustrious panel here about the future of CSPC. For those of you who have been at the Montreal and Toronto events, we've been hearing constantly that the conferences have been fantastic, have been animating, have been networking, and great social activities, but a lot of people have been asking, what is the next step? And so this panel is about some of that, and we're going to need your participation in this because we're looking for and welcoming your feedback on this particular challenge that we have before us. So on our panel to kick things off, Peter Hackett from University of Alberta. Chris Hornberger with the Halifax Group will give you some of the results of survey work that we've been doing and some of the business plan. Andre Albinati will say a few words as well about his experience on the advisory committee and also what he's hearing. And Mayor Dad, our dear illustrious leader, Mayor Dad, will tell us a lot about where things should be going, could be going. And then we will open this up for your participation, your feedback, which we will welcome. And please feel free, and I will go around and see if I can draw some interesting feedback from you on a variety of issues that will be presented to you so that we can get some constructive comments moving forward. Donc, merci beaucoup pour votre attention. I thank you very much, by the way, for your patience over these last a day and a half, and I think it's been a very good session. So let's start with Peter. Tell us all about it.
Hey everybody, how you doing? I've got the impossible task of setting a global context and then a Canadian context. And so I'm going to be very superficial about everything. I'm sure any one of you know more in depth and in detail about anything that I might say. But this is intended to sort of position why Canada needs a CSPC and what CSPC might deliver to Canada in the future. So the core thing, I think, is that, of course, we all agree science is pretty central to everything. It's how civilization moves forward, and countries have to be on top of science in order to have any sort of leadership role. And science is changing. I'm going to talk about a few shifts. So the first one you will know about is where science is being done is changing, has changed, right? It has shifted to China, India, Brazil, and Turkey. So a number for you in nanotechnology. 20 years ago, China produced 1% of the papers. Today, they produce 25% of the papers. This change has happened linearly over 20 years. Papers are now of very high quality. So where science is done has shifted in a fundamental way. Think of those countries not as emerging, but as tomorrow's innovative economies. They have the knowledge already, they have the capital already, and they have the need, the entrepreneurial drive because of all of this translocation to cities. Think what that will produce in the next 20 years. Next big shift that has happened. Look around the world, count up where research is done. In 2008, $650 billion of research was done in business. $150 billion of research is done in the public sector. That's a huge shift that has occurred in our lifetimes, and the idea of technology transfer from A to B maybe now goes from B to A. Governments have no control over this. They don't know what's going on in business till it hits. Science literacy is increasing. You heard yesterday the most powerful politician in Europe has a PhD, and PhDs run some of the most competitive manufacturing companies in Europe. It's already happened. There are big shifts in how science is done. You know much more about this. Single global issues are addressed by teams across sectoral and national boundaries, often using single global facilities, again, beyond the reach of nations. And finally, there are many other things one could say, but modern communication systems allow individuals to reach out to other individuals to bring forward technology at dazzling speed. It just pops up here, pops up there, pops up over the other place. No one knows anything about it until it's suddenly there in the marketplace. As an example of this, Bitcoin. Nobody really knows who developed it, but it's a monetary system outside the control of governments. It may not be there yet, but imagine what would happen if such a thing grew. So science is changing, continues to change. Each advance builds upon the advance that went before, so the rate of change is continually increasing, continually accelerating. And this challenges governments. And so science policy, I think, has to change. And it has to be on the money. Canada today, in view of the things that we've told you about just here and that you all know in your bones, might be where Singapore was 40 years ago. And through a very competent public service and very competent policies, we may be able to succeed in the future. But I doubt that we can succeed in the future unless we do that. So the thing we're about, the thing you're interested in, is of enormous national importance and has to be finely, exquisitely tuned. We have to be the best in the world in our policies to succeed over the next 20 years. So we need fresh minds. A little bit about Canada. So I was in Waterloo at an event with Sir David King, who was the science advisor to Tony Blair, and Arthur Carty. It was an event honoring Arthur Carty. I was very pleased to be there. The day after Jenkins came out, and we sat at dinner, and all around the table, the Canadians were decrying, beating their breasts, tearing their hair, and saying how bad we are. And eventually David King said, well, I need to tell you something. I went to dinner in Rome with some Italian hosts, had a great meal, and then they called the waiter over at the end, and they started shouting at him in Italian. I didn't know what they were saying. And the waiter went away, right? Very dejected, brought back the chef, and then they started again, and then the chef and the waiter went away, very, very dejected. And David turned to his host and said, I thought that was a pretty good meal. And they said, yeah, this is the best restaurant in Rome. But if we don't complain, they won't keep their high standards. So, I think sometimes in Canada that we are just a little bit too hard on ourselves. We have a rich, diverse, tolerant, inclusive society. We're a nation of high achievement. We shouldn't be ashamed of what we've achieved in research and innovation. We have enormous natural advantages. We bring immigrants to the country, and they contribute in a real short time. So we have a lot to be proud of. But this future is going to be hyper-competitive. And so we need to do even better in the future, and we can't rest on our laurels. And we have this sense, there is this sense at play, and it's fed by report after report after report that looks into how we've done on the innovation front. And it says, well, we haven't done as well as we might have liked. And we've gotten away with it because we're so enormously rich. So there's this sense that maybe this underpinning isn't there for the future. And we've got to up our game. I won't recite all of the doom and gloom. We're sort of at the back of the pack in PhD production. Our venture capital industry isn't competitive. Our support for business R&D has been looked at recently, and it has been found to be one of the least effective in the OECD. 24% of research in business is paid for by the government. Maybe this has distorted what business research is about. And one can go on and on and on, and I'll just sound like some sort of a tyrant. So the sense is that we have to do better. We have to tune up our policy-making regime because the next 20 years are so much more competitive. So that then is the backdrop, right? To go forward, Canada needs the most effective science policy, the most effective innovation policy, and the most effective competition policy. We can't protect our industry with barriers. Those barriers have to come down, and we'll be exposed to this global competition. And so it's indeed critical that we have fresh minds, the best and brightest minds in Canada, coming to the question of these policies, because they set the frame for everyone else. They define the size of the fishbowl and the rest of it for the rest of us to work in. And those policies have to be the best that they can be so that we can go forward and compete. The other aspect that I'll just pull out that's key, we can't keep going from report after report after report that looks backward and says, well, this policy didn't work out. We're smarter than that now. We've got to develop the science of science policy so that we can say, well, if we make this intervention, these are going to be the consequences going forward, both intended and unintended. Next year will be 2012. In 2002, we set the target to move from 15th to 5th in the OECD countries, right, by 2010. Well, here we are in 2011. If you look at the top 25 countries, we're 14th. We've moved from 15th to 14th. If you look at the top 40 countries, we're 24th. We've moved from 15th to 24th. So our intentions have been good. The policy framework that we put in place to realize them hasn't delivered results. And in the next 20 years, we've got to do better. So we've got to be able to look at policy, extrapolate, and say, well, this is what will happen if we do this, that, or the other. And we've got to get it right. And that's 8 minutes, as Paul requested.
Thanks very much, Peter. That's a great context-setting piece. For those of you who haven't seen it, by the way, Mark News has a nice little piece by Mehrdad and Peter that appeared a few days ago on upgrading our science policy to 2.0. So this whole issue of ratcheting something up is an important issue. I would draw your attention to that piece from Peter and Mehrdad. I'm going to turn it over if we can fix. I'm going to turn this over. We've as part of this feedback that we've been receiving, one of the issues was, what is it that we're hearing from the community at large out of these conferences, and how can we build on that? So we did a number of interviews. We did some surveying. You're going to hear a bit of the results of that from our next speaker, Chris Hornberger from Halifax Group, who will lay out some of this in terms of describing both the process that we went through in designing this draft business plan, looking at some of the feedback we were already receiving, but of course looking forward to, thanks very much, to further feedback from you. So Chris, I'll let you set the stage for this feedback we've been receiving.
Thanks very much, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. In about mid-July, I got a call from Penny Park from the Science Media Center, and many of you will know Penny or may have heard her in the previous session. Penny said to me, "Hey, Chris, what's up?" I said, well, things are pretty good here. And she said, I had a call today from a guy named Mehrdad. And I said, who's Mehrdad? She said, he runs a conference. And I said, he runs a conference? Where does he run a conference? She says, well, you know, he's had a couple of conferences, and he called me and wanted to know what I did to get the Science Media Center up and running. And she said to him, well, I had a plan. And he said, oh yeah, well, where'd you get your plan? And he said, well, she said, well, I got it from Halifax Global. He said, well, who's Halifax Global? And she said, well, they're a consulting firm in Halifax. So she said, I'll send him an email and introduce him to you. So I got an email about 5 minutes later from Penny with a copy to Mehrdad that just said, hey, here's an introduction. Go to it. Good luck. And within minutes, I had a response from Mehrdad to say, hey, can we talk? And with that began a rather intense affair over the last 4 months with Mehrdad and the steering committee, many of whom you see up here in front of me and a few more in the audience. So what we undertook was an assignment to help Mehrdad and the steering committee figure out what's next for the CSPC. And I want to just address one word that we have heard repeatedly through our consultation process, and that is the word centre. We've been calling this the Canadian Science Policy Centre, and we've had a lot of questions and a lot of pushback. So we decided, Peter Hackett and I, last evening, that we would no longer refer to this as the centre, because as you'll see, what our stakeholders actually told us was that it's not a center that we need, but what we need is a virtual network. And a center seems to denote something that's quite different than a virtual network. So we're now just calling it the CSPC, and whatever the name evolves to, it will evolve. So what I'd like to do is just take you through the key stakeholder findings so that you have some context for what many of you who may have participated in previous conferences have said, some of you who were interviewed or participated in the survey that we sent out or the workshop that we had in September. We've tried to incorporate most of the feedback that we got. And so with that, we've got our key findings. So let me just see if this works. There we go. So what you see here is the people who responded. And there were about 60 that we consulted with, and that was a combination of an online survey, interviews, one-on-one interviews, and a workshop. The steering committee participated in all of these things, and they're included in these folks as well. So you can see that we had good representation from all the sectors: university, government, granting agencies, the NGOs, research centers, the private sector, media, a foundation participated, and a bunch of associations. So we got a pretty good cross-section of folks participating and telling us what they thought the CSPC should be and where it could go. We asked them where they thought the gaps were and in the science and innovation policy environment in Canada. And what you see here are the key gaps that they identified. The dark blue connotes what people completely agreed with the statement. The lighter blue is partially disagreeing or agreeing somewhat. The pink is disagreeing somewhat, and the orange is disagreeing completely. So you can see that nearly 90% agreed that the environment or the community is isolated and fragmented. About 85% agreed that there was no forum for policy for science. Many, again, 80%, no coordinated discussion of science policy issues. Difficult for new graduates to access science policy community. No connection among stakeholders of science and technology in academia, government, and so on. Low public awareness of the importance of science. No forum for science, and I think that's a duplicate. And science is not used to find solutions to social and economic issues. And even there, 50% of the respondents agreed, at least somewhat, that that was the case. So what that told us is that there are fairly significant gaps here from what the stakeholders were identifying. So we said to them, well, what's the compelling reason for doing something about that? And these are the things that they told us, is that we need better opportunities year-round to network and communicate. We need a national forum. This needs to spread across the country and needs to take regional things into consideration. We need to be able to promote and support science and innovation policy. We need better linkages internationally. We need to be able to link this to societal benefits. And we need a national voice for science policy research. So those were the key compelling reasons that the stakeholders who participated in this identified as needing to do something beyond just having an annual conference. Next. Okay. So we said, okay, what's the value proposition? What is it that this entity, whatever it might look like, what does it really need to, what kind of value does it need to provide? And they said, well, we need some ongoing engagement. We need something that serves as a catalyst for unifying the voice on various science and innovation policy topics. We need a single voice that speaks to science policy in Canada. We need a forum for science policy experts to collaborate. And when they talked about experts, by the way, they weren't talking just about academics or government. They were talking about the private sector. And we heard repeatedly that we need to really find a way to engage the private sector in the discussion and in the dialogue. We need to be able to describe and measure the value of science to society. And I remember speaking with one of the heads of agencies who said, you know, it would be really great if somebody out there could talk to the issue of metrics and really tell us what it is that, what value we are providing. And I think we've heard several times through the course of this conference the need for metrics. Promote the value of science and innovation policies to address economic issues. In today's environment, we know that more and more it's important that we make contributions to the economy of the country, particularly through science. Put information into a politically communicable form. And I remember speaking with Preston Manning, who as many of you will know, is a big proponent of this one. And he talked about how it's really important that we be able to talk to politicians. And for those of you who were here for the political panel yesterday, you'll have learned that there are very few scientists in Canada who are also politicians. And so it's pretty difficult for politicians to understand the language that scientists speak. And so stakeholders felt that there was an opportunity to be the linkage and the translator of that conversation between the scientist and the politicians, and influence the policy decision-making process. They felt there needed to be some way to do that. So the benefits they saw was demonstrating how a strong science culture is essential to Canada's democratic and economic future. They felt that some body needed to do that there is no one that does that today, that we need a better understanding of links to Canada's productivity performance. And I think we've heard that several times through this conference. The importance of science and technology-based knowledge society. What we heard repeatedly was that we don't have a really good understanding of how important it is to us, at least the public doesn't, and it's important that a forum be there for that knowledge to get out there and help people appreciate the importance of it. Making science accessible to policymakers and policy accessible to scientists. So that's that translation between the two parties. Improved connections and relationships within the science policy community. We heard so often about the fragmentation and the disparate group of policymakers or science and innovation policy makers and scientists who are out there who just don't talk to each other, and agencies of various kinds. And they felt there was an opportunity for somebody to challenge the status quo. So we said then, okay, well, what would this entity do? What would it actually do? And they said, well, beyond the conference, it should be doing something, taking that conference throughout the whole year, because doing it just once a year isn't quite good enough. And we need to be able to find a way to link and communicate amongst these various members of the community, and that includes policymakers and science policy experts, the private sector, the public sector, and young scientists and entrepreneurs. And we heard repeatedly the need to engage young scientists and entrepreneurs as this entity evolves. And it's been one of the hallmarks, I think, of this conference. Training. We need to find a way to train the next generation of science, technology, and innovation policy thinkers. We need to educate decision makers about science and scientists about policy. So these are all activities, remember, that they were thinking a CSPC could engage in. Identify mechanisms, policies, and programs that can impact the country's social and economic well-being. So they wanted to see how we could, an entity like this could actually make a difference in the day-to-day of people's lives. And they felt the center should or the CSPC should demonstrate the relevance of science by illustrating what science can do to solve the big problems of the day. So there were some pretty lofty ideas of what an organization, a relatively small organization, particularly a startup, might want to do. Many of those thoughts prefaced by what they've heard here at the conference in the past 2 years. So with that, we came away and said, okay, well, what is it that we actually need to do? And so we had this auspicious steering committee, 3 of whom are sitting at the desk, at the table here. 4 of them are sitting here at the table with me, and several are in the audience. And we worked diligently through the last 4 months to come up with a plan based on what we heard. And with that, I'd like to turn the podium over to Mehrdad to talk a little bit about what that plan is all about and what the 3 pillars in that plan are. You want the slide up?
Thank you, Chris. Okay, I hope it works. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for your patience to stay until this time and to hear this panel, and I commend your enthusiasm and energy for this conference and for future of this endeavor. And nobody perhaps can feel the pressure that the questions that I get on a daily basis by emails, by phone calls, and other casual encounters in the corridors and so on. So what is the next for CSPC? And are you guys want to be a lobby group? And is CSPC a research institute and would like to conduct original research as an academic unit? Or is CSPC an advisory to government? And the latest one, I received an email just 2 weeks ago from a very well-known organization in the US. You know, all of you know about that organization, and asking me, what is the official position of CSPC about the Keystone gas pipelines? And I scratched my head. Well, I don't know about that. There is no official position of CSPC about anything. But so here are the questions that I have struggled with, and the group of volunteers, of course, over the course of last 2-3 years. And we thought, okay, everybody's asking about the next step, and really, the community has mobilized in the past 2-3 years, and they are ready for a jump, for an upgrade, and for all those reasons that Peter mentioned. And we need an upgrade really in science policy, infrastructure, and science policy and innovation policy landscape. So we thought maybe based on the strengths that CSPC represent, we have to come up with a next step. And that effort started, and we had a fantastic group of individuals actually on board. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank each one of them, and Paul Dufour, Peter Hackett, Chris, Andre Albinati, and those others whose name were here. Thank you very much for your time, for your support. And I guess CSPC is really grateful for your time and insights in this. And so we hope we can go to the next step based on the strengths that CSPC represent. And as Chris mentioned, and based on the consultation with the community, with those stakeholders, we thought that we can focus on a few things. Number one, being a national hub, a national basically media for science policy stakeholders, and a network, a dynamic network by which the expertise, the individuals, the organizations can exchange ideas, plans, projects, and as a network that can foster collaboration and, most importantly, cross-sectoral talk. And this is the absolutely needed, and it has reported in various assessment and analysis that something that Canada is lagging behind is cross-sectoral collaboration and dialogue and exchange of expertise. So we thought this network, which already exists because of the conference, this is a national conference, national network, we can expand on that, and we can tap into various sectors that have already connected and plugged into the conference and expand it and make it even more effective and more dynamic, and bring together leaders of government, private sector, non-for-profit, and foster collaboration and dialogue. Increase the online presence, of course, and finally to be a home for various science policy stakeholders. And that's number one. And number two is the value that we have plugged into younger generation. Younger researchers that you have witnessed, many of them were present at this conference, many of them are engaged in organizing this conference, and many of them through various venues are already connected with us through emails, online, website, and so on. And on the note that unfortunately there is no venue currently for younger researchers to be trained in science policy arena. And by train, I'm not speaking of traditional academic training, master's or PhD. I'm talking about being familiar with the, when you come out of the laboratory, being familiar with how policy is being made and how political world is function. You heard Dr. Kelly Leach yesterday mention that she asked younger generation graduate students to come to her office and to see how Parliament Hill works. So what we are offering, we say, okay, so let's make it more organized and not just on an ad hoc basis. Let's have a machinery by which we can get the brightest and those people who are interested in science policy from science and other disciplines can get some trainings in a format of a fellowships, internships, and others, and to see how political machinery works, to see how policymaking works. So that was the number two of the activities that we thought CSPC can perform. And number three, advancing the science of science policy. Basically what that is the, because this expanded network who has access to the best and the brightest and who has access to expertise from various sectors can commission the analysis, the assessment, the evaluation by bringing expertise from various sectors to conduct analysis on different issues which is directly related to science policy in this country. And another addition to that activity could be that CSPC, if it can get enough support, can even issue challenges. And there are organizations across the world, even in Canada, that they issue challenges and they get the best, and through a review process, they choose the best proposals to answer and to those challenges. And this is another thing for the future of CSPC that perhaps depending on this level of support that it can get, it can expand on that. So I hope I could give you a picture, not very vague, of the plans of the pillars of this emerging network. And I'm looking forward for your feedback and advice. And we are happy to take your feedback and implement it into this proposal. This is V1, version 1, and we hope to get to version 2 by your help and your advice. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Mehrdad. Thank you, Mehrdad. We're going to leave that up. But before we open it up, I want to introduce you to another member of our advisory panel, Andre Albianetti from Earnscliffe, who's going to give you a bit of a sense of the practitioner view of this interface that we've been talking about on science policy, and then we'll hopefully get a great dialogue going. Let me just quick reminder to everyone here. This conference operates with a lot of volunteer work. There's over 70 plus volunteers involved, and it's quite a challenge to pull this together. And what you heard from Mehrdad is an attempt to try to now professionalize this structure, this network, in a much more ambitious way, while taking some small steps. So you have to just keep this in mind as we're talking about the future here at CSPC. André, à vous.
Thanks very much. Listen, I just want to take a couple of minutes simply to, we're all here because we believe in better science policy. So that's an excellent starting point, I think, for this kind of discussion. I just want to quickly speak about why I think I believe, and I think many of us do up here, and some of you in the room certainly, that there's an appetite for this at the political level. My day-to-day job for clients in the public and private sectors has a lot to do with translation. Translation between members of parliament, ministers and their staff, departmental officials and regulators, CEOs of multinational corporations, entrepreneurs, media, and of course scientists. And each of these audiences have their own unique language and their own motivations and needs. Translating between these audiences is a key part of effective policymaking, and so we're discussing this. For the science policy community, the job of translating amongst these audiences can be even more onerous, though. The gap even larger. So whether a 20-something ministerial staffer, I was one of those once, trying to figure out what advice to provide a minister, a new public servant faced with consulting on a regulatory change that involves, a range of complex scientific fields of research, or a PhD student looking for a way to engage in science policy in his or her own field. Creating an ongoing forum that promotes effective science policymaking is really necessary, and I think the political level believes that too. We win, Canadians win, we get better policies for the reasons that Peter mentioned earlier. I want to give you an example of why I think this kind of forum is necessary now, and why this aligns with government need right now too. I mean, we heard the macro, but there are some specific examples that were raised over the course of the last couple of days. I just want to point to one. To make this tangible about why this is necessary for the government. On Wednesday, David Waters moderated a panel on the Jenkins report, and that's stimulating some controversy and discussion in the room here, and certainly out in the larger policy community, and that's important. There's some discussion on the importance of how small, medium-sized enterprises are included within the R&D space. In the policy space, that is. And these are firms that represent 54% of the economy and provide roughly 45% of national R&D output, and, terrific, okay. So it would follow, therefore, that SMEs should be equitably represented in the governance of the Industrial Research and Innovation Council, and also in networks of excellence and fields with applications in rapidly growing global markets, such as nanotechnology and materials technology, is just one example. But in order for SMEs to participate in boards and NCEs and so forth, and this came up as part of the discussion, or other government entities, they need to be compensated for their time or participation. These are individuals working within companies where participation is, it's a $1,500 a day trade-off, and that's these are individuals who, are lean. They don't have enormous resources at their disposal. So except that many of these organizations are prohibited from paying anyone to participate in governance or consultation. So, I mean, immediately right there, you've got an example of a gap or barrier that's discussed within this kind of forum that, as government is trying to figure out what sort of policy steps it takes to address the competitive challenges that Peter's pointed out to. That's created a forum for that sort of discussion to take place. So from a government perspective, Jenkins has made some recommendations for bridges to be built, each one requiring translation, between academia and early adopter markets, between government procurement and SMEs providing technologies, between private large adopters of technology and SMEs. And so, identifying and breaking through these barriers to participation through active engagement and attempts to understand each other's language, if you will, into improved policy and science policy development. My view, anyways, is that is exactly what this initiative is about. I think science policy will be better for it. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Merci, André. So there you have it, in a nutshell. We're going to welcome your feedback now on what I think you saw from Mehrdad's presentation earlier about some of the three key components of this plan around a national hub, around the youth engagement, which, by the way, I personally believe this is probably the intergenerational issue brought through with this conference is, I think, one of its major assets. And we're hearing more and more about, what we need to do in terms of career options and why science policy is important for the next generation, and where's la relève going to come from in this area. And then the third area, the science of science policy issue that Mehrdad put on the table. So we're welcoming comments, des commentaires, suggestions, propos, critiques, as long as they're constructive, about where we should be going as far as what you've been hearing in this conference, in your previous conferences that were taking place in Montreal and Toronto, if you've been involved, and just give us some feedback. And we're here to listen. We're taking copious notes. Everything's being taped. And we'll try to filter this into the version of our Science Policy 2.0 plan, which will be, of course, available to everyone to comment on the web. But for now, we will ask for your immediate feedback and get some early signals from you. À vous. Don't be shy. S'il vous plaît. Anne, are you coming up for something? Okay. Come on up. Come on up. Lauren?
Hi.
Yes.
This is my first conference and most enjoyed. My background, as most of you know, is science and science policy, and I really got a lot of value from this. One of the things I think we all saw is that governments need to change how they develop their major strategies. And hopefully, this type of group can influence that. What I saw in the survey was a suggestion that economists need to know the importance of science in their decisions. I saw the word cross-sectoral up in the right-hand side of the screen that you were going to leave up there. And I gathered that meant cross-sectoral across different science disciplines, I think. Okay, thank you. Because what I was going to suggest was an inverse that I really think would be valuable in the effectiveness of science policy, is that this group worked to demonstrate the value of economic, social, environment, legal, and ethical, the ELSIs, issues in the development of science and innovation policy, that you come to the political arena with the thoughts on that. I'm looking forward to that, Peter, because if you don't do that, you leave it up to the economists to crush your advice. And if you show the completeness when you bring it forward, which is extremely important because everything we're doing right now has all of those elements, then I think it may actually improve the perception of this organization.
I guess it's shut down.
Go ahead, Pierre.
Yeah. So I think I'll take the royal we are in violent agreement. And if you look back at...
Oh.
Okay. So we're in violent agreement, right? So I could leave it at that. But if you look at what we've done in the past, we've sort of said productivity, so we need innovation in companies, so we need R&D in companies, so we need people leaving universities or technology, and so therefore we need to finance R&D in universities. And actually, I think what we have to flip around is it's competition, and competition drives innovation in companies. And innovation in companies calls for research in companies. And this calls for smart people to go into companies. And then you have the case. So we need to take it from the top down, as I think you're suggesting. As you know, any rational economic system actually works. Nations aren't productive. Companies are productive, and they are productive because they have to compete, and so on and so forth.
We are in violent agreement.
Absolutely, yes. And it's crucial that we get it right. You know, we've tried 20 years not getting it right. Let's try 20 years a different way.
Could you, yeah, sorry, I should have asked for you to identify yourselves, please.
Sure thing. David Kent from the University of Cambridge. I'm wondering, so this conference itself is a true testament to what you can do with a lot of volunteer energy and a limited amount of money, realistically. And so what I'm wondering is, what are your plans for funding this very ambitious program? How do you get money for internships? How do you get money for workshops throughout the year? And where are your sources going to draw from? And what sorts of baggage come with those particular sources of funding? So if you go exclusively industry and things like this. Thank you.
So that's a good question. Okay. No, that's working. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. So there is a business model in this proposal, and which is based on the membership, organizational membership. And the ideal scenario for that is the university sector, academia, and government departments, and non-for-profits, foundations, and definitely private sector, especially private sector associations, to be the members of these organizations, and they pay the membership fee from different levels and get the benefits of sponsorships for the conference and other benefits for that. So this is the model that we have for generating revenue for such center, and definitely it has to function on a basis of non-for-profit and definitely an independent organization. And it can be an arm-linked, a combination of various sectors. And this is the model that we have in mind, and it has shown in other examples that worked well as an independent organization. So I think it can work in this case too. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
I just like to pick up on the word ambitious. I think that what you see up here is ambitious, but it's intended to be phased in over a 3 to 5 year period. So the intent is not that the doors open and you've got a full-blown organization. The real need here is to be able to extend the work of this conference over the course of the year and to engage with the stakeholders throughout the year, whether that be online or whether that be through a series of thematic events or other roundtables or workshops. And as Mehrdad has said, we were very conscious when we developed the financial plan, and my colleague Andy Cutnout here was the mastermind behind it. He made sure that there was a diverse source of revenue there, so that there's no dependency on any one source. And obviously all of this is going to depend on the ability to raise that money, otherwise there isn't much point in starting at all. But the intent is not that this be funded by any one organization or by government.
Just can I add one more comment, because this is important. This entity, or CSPC, is not supposed to pay entirely for all the fellows who are supposed to go to different organizations or parliamentarian offices, but it's supposed to facilitate that transition, a model that AAAS is involved in. So AAAS only pays for one fellow. And they have, I don't know, 50 to 100 fellows every year. Those fellows are paid by their home organization. But it is AAAS, which is the driving force and facilitate that fellowship program.
I'll come to you in a minute, Mark. Ryan, please introduce yourself. There, you're on. You're on.
Yeah, okay. Hi, my name is Anne Go. I'm a postdoc at the University of Ottawa and was in charge of Ottawa outreach for the CSPC. So I've had a really great opportunity to work with an amazing team of volunteers from the Ottawa area who have coordinated our relationship with our community partners. And so I think that's a useful initiative for the CSPC to continue. My question is, what is your opinion on what it means to be a single voice for science policy, and how might that intersect with or interact with the individual points of view from our different community partners or from sponsoring organizations or, yeah.
Okay, they refer every tough question to me. I don't know why, but I try to answer.
Have all the answers.
Thank you. Very generous. First of all, I don't think I did mention single voice, but it was in the survey, by the way. The stakeholders mentioned single voice. I personally do not believe in single voice, but I believe in microphone. So and some tools that the different voices can be heard, and science policy needs to be heard in the mainstream. CSPC can facilitate that.
And just to reiterate there, that was what we heard from the stakeholders. That's not necessarily where we ended up going with the planning.
Mark, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Mark Serner. I'm director of the Institute for Science, Society and Policy at the University of Ottawa, which is a multi-faculty institute. And first I would like to say I've been to all three of the conferences, Toronto, Montreal, and here, and actually congratulate especially Merdat, but it's really, I think, a much bigger network that this has happened. I think it's a hugely beneficial thing that we have this conference. So I'm very supportive of that. We also actually, in fact, supported this event financially. I have to, in my role as the director of this new institute, I do have to, it's my job to mention that we have been created out of the same needs. We have a mandate to educate on issues of science, society, and policy, not science policy specifically, a broader framework. And of course, we do activities like events and work with students and so forth. So I just wanted to mention that this University of Ottawa-based institute exists, and what I really wish is that as this gets further discussed, that we have that we also integrate it further. We already are, but that we continue to be integrated into this discussion, because of course there is certainly some overlap the potential for overlap on teaching and education, and I think that needs a bit of organization, because the community is so small across the country that we all have a strong interest, I believe, to work together, which we are. And I should mention that Paul Dufour has been very instrumental in keeping these linkages very open, very functional. He works with us, he works with this group, and I think this will continue to work very well. So thanks, Paul, for doing that.
Merci, bien sûr. Just a comment quickly on that, just briefly. This notion of complementarity is fundamentally a platform under which CSPC is going to work. We have to build with existing structures, existing organizations, and work and leverage that. As Mark correctly pointed out, this is a small community. It's a tight community. It's 2 degrees of separation. It's not 6 degrees of separation. And you know, it's important to make sure that all of the players that represent individual institutions or associations are connected here. And that is what is the vision behind some of this thinking.
If it works. Hello.
You'll be on. You're on.
Okay, I think it's starting. Okay, first of all, thank you for the idea that you go for network and not for the center, because I think it's much more powerful and it's much more open. And some of my questions were answered. I was also worried about a single voice. And so that intrigued me. You said 60 people were included in the survey. I've done few surveys. It's very difficult to choose a really representative sample. So I guess that after this conference, when you put it on the website, you'll get comments, then you'll get somewhat more representative sample. What you might have done, which maybe it's for next conference, I've been at a conference which developed recommendations that go somewhere we want to go, which this conference I think didn't do this time. The comment I have about these things, you could have many, many pillars, I agree. But what you said here was how you engage more people. That's what you wanted to do, not just youth. I belong to the new Canadians, and I think that from McDonald's to Tesla, people were not born here. They were immigrants who became Canadian, and I think we are missing that somewhere there, and that's a pity. So my colleagues with high degrees, if you go out and get a taxi, ask them whether they have master's or PhD from some other country, which is a waste. When you're applying for immigration, they love you. When you come in, oops. So I think this network will open up the possibility for invention and innovation and whatnot. So I suppose that beside the membership, if I understood well, you'll be more open because this second pillar, youth engagement, they won't be able to pay membership fee, as want my new immigrants. So that's my comments for now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Chris. Let's discuss the membership option that we have in the plan. It is intended that only organizations would be members, and that anybody else belongs to the network. So when we talk about the network, we're talking about the individuals who make up the organizations who are members, and those individuals who are interested in participating in the network. So it is not intended to be closed in any way. And those individuals who participate in the network do not have to pay. So that's the structure of this. It is intended to be inclusive.
On the note about the immigration and immigrants, I think I am one of them. How are you doing? So I didn't have the chance to be born in this great country, and I immigrated to Canada about 16 years ago, and I think I made the right decision. And but this is the network is for science policy, and anybody, any organization that anyhow is related to science policy can be a member, can be included, will be included in that network. That's why it's a network. Anybody is there. There are some, there is a membership-based fee membership, which is only for organizations, and that's a model for generating revenue. And other than that, everybody can be included in that, even the international stakeholders, relevant organizations. One of the actually objectives of this network is to establish or strengthen the ties with similar organizations in other countries.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mehrdad. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Dawn Chow. I do work for a federal department, but that's not why I'm here.
Which one?
Health.
Thank you.
So far, from what I've seen, we've engaged quite a few sectors of the community, and we have fairly well-educated, intelligent people contributing and being a part of this. But a great number of the population is not so educated, and that's not just youth. So are we hoping to engage these people? And if so, how? How do we include them in the conversation if they are Canadians and they would be affected, perhaps, by science policy? So just want to hear what your thoughts are. I know I have my thoughts. I want to know what your thoughts are on this.
Well, we welcome
any and all.
Yeah, I think we have to make sure that the channels of communications are open, and as Paul mentioned, I guess this proposal somehow will be public through the website or something, and definitely we would like to continue this conversation and receive feedbacks from especially the younger generation, of course. Yeah, they are the first to respond.
But, sorry, maybe I could just ask you to perhaps clarify, what is your view on your specific question?
Okay, well, you just put me on the spot there. I don't.
I'm just trying to draw out a
I
bit
guess
more.
what I'm thinking is there are people who may not be so integrated in the university or industry, more of the management side or the science policy networks. You know, your average people who work at McDonald's and retail and factory workers, small and business entrepreneurs, you know, all the rest of the people. So how would they be engaged? Because they may not necessarily hear about something like this on their own.
So,
and they may be a slightly different sector than youth because you can't just go to high schools to tell them about it.
Yeah. So it's enormously important, and we'll all work together to make sure more of this happens. Yet, much of it is happening. If you read your business section of your newspaper, it's all about science and how that plays in the economy and society. And I just want to tell you that I listened to CBC Friday morning about a month ago. Ian Hanuman Singh interviewing David Deutsch. He's a very frontier physicist in Cambridge. And he's talking about quantum mechanics, how we don't quite understand it, and how this probably means parallel universes, how most of the energy in the world, we don't know what it is, how most of the matter in the world, we don't know what it is, how the laws of physics essentially mean that we can all be immortal. It hasn't quite happened yet, but it could. So I'm telling you all of this just to say this is on my CBC radio, not that everyone listens to it, but that Ian Hanuman Singh was totally absorbed and totally engaged in this discussion about the frontiers of science and where it might go and what it might mean to all of us. So one of the things I would say is we need to bring those public figures who talk to Canadians all of the time, who speak to the issues all of the time, and who actually know a lot more than they think they know. I think of the program Spark and Nora Young, for instance, the sorts of things that she's doing week after week after week. So I think I want to do more, and I think we've got quite a good foundation, and I'm sure this organization needs to keep at work at that, and I'm out of it.
Thanks, Peter. Oui. Numéro 3. Number 3, please.
Paul Lebey, Chief Scientist Office, DRDC. Okay, I really believe that we need that to be a network. To make it fair, I suggest we should have a voice, anybody, but it has to be authentication type of a registration. So if I start a blog on one direction, I don't want somebody else to take my voice. It's my voice. And it will be the same thing for everybody. So we have all the chance to express and help to progress. When we say one voice, maybe it's not one voice, it's one sheet of music, and we try to harmonize the different contributors from different point of view, so to progress where Canada should be in science and policy, and so on. I will see that as a way to unify our effort for success.
Merci, Paul. Yes, orchestras are a good thing to bring together around some sheet music. Charles, I think you're going to say something. Charles, please introduce yourself.
Thanks. I'm Charles Davis from Ryerson University. I'd like to make a suggestion which I think would help, if it were implemented over time, it would help develop shared ideas about what is excellence in science policy and what is excellence in science policy practice. And that would be if this group would institute awards, not necessarily of great monetary value, but awards that would provide recognition. One award would be for science policy thought leadership. This would be about writing, preferably scholarly writing, that exemplifies excellence in science policy analysis, and it would speak to your science of science policy objectives. The other would be an award for practice leadership in science policy, and this would be for any practitioners whether they're in the public or private sector or in the mixed sector, who would provide cases of practice, of excellent practice, effective practice, evidence-based practice, practice that leads to socially beneficial outcomes. And then both cases of practice could be discussed in the conference, and over time one would accumulate a corpus of learnings, and that would be a way to help spread knowledge and capabilities about science policy, and that would speak to your youth engagement and your network aims.
Thanks very much, Charles. Great ideas. Merida's going to comment on that.
Thank you, Charles. This is great, and I guess maybe you have read our previous business plan, which was not for public, but anyway. But no, thank you. This is great, and it was in fact mentioned in the first strategic plan that we put together just on a very casual basis, the Awards of Excellence in Science Policy, and we should do that. But all these, including the next point, needs the support. Needs resources, needs people, and basically somebody has to do those, and we do not have anybody basically to take over to be in charge of those responsibilities and develop plans and taking care of them. And there is another idea. We just had a conversation with one of the participants. For example, we would love to perhaps issue a competition. I mean, put a competition for the next conference. University students come up with some sort of proposals for a science policy question. Okay, answer the science policy questions, put it on the website, and ask all the university students across Canada to answer to that question. So this is, I think, very nice practice. But the question is then, who should work on that? And I challenge you or ask you for your support. If you can support us, can help us with office, with computer, with staff, with executive assistant, and with some perhaps money, definitely we're going to do all those.
Anarkan, please.
Okay, I think speaker number 4 was there before me.
Well, if
okay, thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. So I just have 2 very quick points and then a suggestion. I'm also hung up on the youth engagement thing. That's my 3rd point. First point is we talked about virtual organizations. You may already know this, so excuse me if the information is redundant. The Canada Wood Fiber Centre, in the context of the Canadian Forest Service, the organization I work for, is a virtual organization that brings together scientists from our different labs with clearly defined deliverables, intimately linked to the policy priorities of the Government of Canada and NRCan. Of course, that's a different animal because there's an infrastructure already in place in the way of labs and employees, so it becomes a little bit easier. Well, that's one point. I guess my second point is more or less a suggestion. I agree very much. I'm hung up on the youth engagement, and I think that I agree very much with the gentleman from Ryerson who made the reference to awards, etc. I am thinking at a much lower level. As someone who has been judging science fairs for high school students for the past 15 years, I would submit to you that the kind of projects that I've seen, that we've all seen who have been to science fairs, either as judges or otherwise, there's some very impressive work that students do. There are very impressive initiatives that they take. And I don't think it'd be a stretch to say that, given the caliber of some projects, that if you challenge somebody to go there one step further and add something on that says, my work will support Canada's competitive position in such and such a regard, I think you'll get something back really, that might be very worthwhile. To this end, I would like to suggest a special award, either the Canada-wide Science Fair or at science fairs in major centers, such as in Ottawa. Natural Resources Canada's Earth Sciences sector issues a special award every year at the science fairs. So that's not much of a stretch to do that. I highly recommend that, based on to get the youth engagement, that you seriously consider that. And with the gray matter a bit in my ears getting older, I've forgotten my second point, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellent point. For those of you who were at that session yesterday on Science as Culture with Ian Chubb, Leslie Lewis, and Denise Amiot from the museum here. That issue, this whole issue of culture and youth engagement, and we have this fantastic network, a number of you know about it, called STAN, Science and Technology Awareness Network, which tries to bring together all these science centers, museums, and public outreach groups, including for the youth. So it's a great opportunity to leverage, again, to leverage with an existing organization, something that we could build on in the CSPC plan. Marisa, por favor.
Hi, I'm Marissa Bender from Natural Resources Canada. So this is my first time at this conference, and I've really enjoyed it. So I'm looking forward to next year's. So I'm just curious about the second part under the National Hub, or the first part, pardon me, about extending the conference throughout the year. And I was wondering if you could just maybe expand on what you meant about by extending the conference, whether it be like a virtual conference online, or whether or not this is smaller events, or more focused regional events like a Ontario Science Policy Conference or something like that. So I was just wondering about if you could expand on that box there.
Okay, I think there are several things that could be included in that section. One of them is thematic conferences and seminars and focus on one issue. And the other one is sector-oriented conference and seminars or webinars. And the other one is roundtables, small roundtables with the inclusion of government policymakers, young entrepreneurs, and industry who has a stake in some particular issue, and bring them together on a day, let's say, roundtable discussion to come up with some sort of practical solutions. And these are all the formats that can be included and can be expanded. But as I said, sector and thematic seminars and regional seminars are part of those.
And online.
And on the webinar, I mentioned.
There's an intent in the plan to really spruce up the online capability of CSPC so that it actually does network the community wherever it happens to be.
Thanks. Thank you. Oh, sorry, in my previous remarks about STAN and the science centers, I forgot to mention Tracy Ross over there. Tracy's did a fantastic job there. And thank you. Shiva.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Shiva Amiri. I'm with the Ontario Brain Institute. I was on the organizing committee for the first 2 years, and it was amazing getting to work with the smart group of people who are putting this together. One of the reasons I joined the organizing committee was because I thought there wasn't an avenue for scientists, this big group of really smart people, to be advising government on a variety of issues. So sort of a hub where scientists are sort of evidence-based policies. And I'm wondering where that fits into the 3 pillars. I'm not sure which of those addresses that specific area that we have discussed a lot. And that panel with the government, with the politicians who were scientists, they said that there is a need for that. So I'm wondering which of these 3 pillars addresses that.
Well, with respect to evidence-based decision-making, I'm not sure how we can directly relate CSPC because first of all, making policies is the business of government, number one. Number 2 is government has its own channels to get feedbacks and advice. And number 3 is up to government to decide who they want to receive feedback and advice from. So we cannot come forward and say, you have to get advice from us. Mm-hmm. I don't think that can work that way. And government may not like it or may not listen to us. So, clearly we have to distinguish ourselves from advising government in that respect directly. Of course, we provide a venue for various stakeholders to their voice being heard, and that definitely has some indirect effect on policy making.
Yeah, I guess just to add, I agree completely with Mehrdad, but there are already a number of science advice-based organizations that provide direct scientific support and advice to the government. I mean, we can all debate how happy we are with the various incarnation of them. But there are a number of them out there, and some of them do sensational work that we can also see publicly and online. Council of Canadian Academies, for example. You know, so there's a range of formal and informal, and there are a number of informal consultations that do take place, though. So, so while there's, you know, the ability to sort of overlap and duplicate and force government to take a look at what you're doing, you don't really want to do that. But to the extent that you can take topical issues and actually in a forum that's unencumbered by the rigors of you know, of secrecy, of, you know, cabinet confidences, of, you know, departmental modes of regulatory, you know, confines, whatever have you. Having a forum that sort of links between those that you can participate in and bring skill sets that touch on a range of these areas and talk about topical issues of interest to the government, that actually is of interest to them. They will pay attention. So my example was the Jenkins panel, because it's topical. It's something that the cabinet is likely going to be chatting about, whether they adopt any of the recommendations, how they feel about them, if they translate those into specific policies. And so you're doing them a service by putting together panels and bringing different viewpoints to the table and into the public realm to debate that. They get to test it in real time and see if everyone in the room is jumping up and down and yelling, if they're shredding papers and, you know, getting emotive about it, or if they're in the discussion of you know, of that sort of panel with learned individuals from different sectors and different backgrounds, that they're actually able to discover things that they didn't know about that can lead them down a certain path. So my view about this is that it's actually quite good that there's an organic sense to it that isn't about specific formal advice to governments. It's more about dissecting some of the issues of the day and understanding those better.
I'm the deputy chair of an organization in Nova Scotia called Nova Knowledge, and Nova Knowledge, while it has a different focus than this, is a similar organization in that it engages people from the community, from government, from academia, from the private sector, to participate in discussions of various topics. And we have actually had government come to us over the years discreetly asking us to test the waters for them, so that if there's a particular issue that they might be concerned about and they want to hear about, rather than them going out directly to the public and saying, what do you think, they've asked Nova Knowledge to bring panels together or do something we call mic debates. And of course, you know, they're liberally populated with people from government so that they can hear what the public thinks. So it's a very powerful way for government to hear what's going on in the minds of their constituents.
Thank you. Just to supplement Andre's comment, for those of you who went to the genomics workshop yesterday, I mean, there was a great example there, moderated by Kerry Morin, Genome Canada, around industry, academia, and the government there together, airing their views on a particular series of issues about where this is going and on what basis we can interact. So there's a powerful potential here without directly providing advice on these issues. Jeff, sorry to keep you.
Jeff Crownston, the Impact Group and Research Money. Just the business plan that you're referring to, I don't think anyone in the room's seen it except you. What's the total budget you're looking for, just for scale?
A full year of operation would be somewhere around $375,000 to $400,000.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes the conference.
Oh, what's the budget of the conference, Murdad?
200,000.
So then you're talking about an incremental 200, say, which isn't a lot.
No, it isn't.
And so in your business model, which would fund the whole 400, if you charged an organization 400, then you need 1,000 members. If you charge them 1,000, you need 400 members. What's your business model in terms of how to get the money through membership?
The membership model is multi-tiered. So, you know, at the very top, we've got in excess of 100,000, whatever that might be. And then we have various categories, with the lowest one being at about $5,000. And with each one of those tiers comes certain benefits. And each one of them is linked in some way to exposure or participation here at the conference. So the conference is an integral part of this. That $400,000, by the way, is for first full year of operation. As the organization ramps up by year 5, I think it was at 650,000, again, including the conference. But there is a reliance in that model on in-kind services and resources. So there is an intent and there has been throughout this whole planning process that this would be a collaborative effort wherever possible. And so shared resources for anyone who is interested is one way to reduce costs. And those resources could be facilities, those could be people, it could be IT, it could be any number of things. So it's intended to not necessarily be a standalone organization. What the plan is intended to do, though, is provide anybody who is interested in collaborating an understanding of what the value proposition is and ensure that the value proposition has some dollars associated with it so they have some idea of what they're getting into if they want to collaborate with CSPC.
Thanks,
And
Jeff. Sorry.
Related to that, you mentioned that some of the member organizations would be government. How many people in the room are actually working with the government department? Could you just put up your hand? I'm one of the founding directors of STAN, which you mentioned. Tracy's on the board. And we don't charge a membership fee. And we have a huge debate on whether we should, and some of us say we should. And when that comes up in the meetings, and we start going toward charging a fee, the government people in the room say, well, we can't pay because we just can't. And I think in an organization like this, that might be a greater problem because of Tier 3. And I just want to do a reality check with the government people in the room. Is that an issue? And also, have you talked to your government colleagues about whether that's an issue? Maybe it's not. In my experience, it has been. So could anyone talk about that?
Well, I'd like to kick that off. We've done plans for other organizations, including the Science Media Centre of Canada. And I think if you go out to their website, you'll see that there are government organizations who are members.
Jeff, I'm going to ask, we heard you. Yeah. We're going to get some feedback, but I would welcome to get a few more comments in. Paul was standing at the mic, but he's gone in the back. So, Mark, I guess you're next.
Yeah, okay. Mark Serner, Institute for Science, Society and Policy. Well, I just would like to comment on the slide since you projected so prominently, and I take this as the intent to get some feedback, endorsement specifically. And I don't want to go on specifics of the various boxes. You know, I understand why they are there. I think all these activities are meaningful. The thing which strikes me is that one thing which is missing. I mean, what is there has to do with outreach, education, and research, which is something done by lots of groups, but I would say insufficiently in this general field. I agree with that. But what is missing to me after going through these 3 conferences is the whole concept of lobbying. If I would have to say what this conference is doing best, really, I mean, to me, it's not a dirty word to say lobbying. I would say that's really its main character, its main function, its main benefit. But I do agree that bringing in the second generation is another very striking feature. But it struck me, you know, looking at this for so long, that this precise strength, which I would consider the greatest strength, is not represented.
Real quick. Well, we'll get to Hillary here.
Thank you, Mark, for that compliment, I guess. You're absolutely right. I mean, as you said, to CSPC, there are various references. Lobby group is one of them, and doing lobby for science, I think, is a novel thing, first of all. It's not dirty at all. Actually, it's a very novel thing. But if you want to do lobby work, I think this is not the approach, and there has to be a different structure and different method, different approach. And you have to find your constituents. For doing lobby, you have to represent a constituency. And CSPC currently does not have that official constituents, okay? And if it's going to do the lobby work, first of all, it needs that constituents. Number two, definitely that the whole idea of national network, intersectional, cross-sectoral dialogue, that's gone. You have to take it out. That's a completely different direction. It's a noble thing to do, but I don't think that CSPC is meant to do that lobby work. Maybe from some of the initiatives and activities that CSPC is doing, maybe we can force that lobby group, that united lobby group for science enterprise emerge from that. That's a possibility, but not the CSPC as it stands.
I'd just like to comment. You know, one of the most effective sort of lobbying presences is a grassroots movement. It impacts policy. It sometimes isn't obvious at first, but it does impact policy over time. It impacts elections. It impacts, you know, thinking at a political level, certainly. One of the things I'm really struck by with this conference and sort of the discussion around, you know, this network that's being discussed right now is that there's a real grassroots component to it. You know, I don't think the need to overtly advocate for or something or take a position specifically on, you know, government must or you should not cut this or you know, I think there's a lot of other organizations out there that will do that. You know, I think certainly the professional, you know, the CMA, you know, as an example, spends a great deal of effort sort of letting its views be known on various scientific issues of the day and will be public about it. There's a number of agencies out there who do that. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is actually a little more stealthy and impactful in government is having this kind of organic thing that where you talk about the issues of the day and it actually, you know, transcripts are looked at. You know, the sense I get is that, you know, Minister Goodyear is very interested, for example, in the discussions that took place here this weekend, and I'm sure Industry Canada will be doing briefing notes, right, on some of the various things and taking a look at them and the various panels and how that impacts their thinking. That's actually quite good, I would argue. So I wouldn't underestimate the impact of that.
Thank you. I'm sensing that it's Friday afternoon, people are starting to shift. So we're going to do the last three people standing with comments, and then we'll do a quick wrap up. Hillary, I believe you're next.
Yes. Hi, my name's Hillary Buckentero, and I'm a first-time volunteer for the CSPC and first conference I've attended. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. I guess my question is about, I'm all for the youth engagement, I'm still in that category, I think. And, but I guess I wonder, as far as building networks, that's all well and good to build networks between the industry and the government and the private sector and everywhere in between. But how do we facilitate not just a network, but facilitate people working in these careers and really building upon that, and not just building a network of it, but having people really doing these things, doing some of the things we talked about in K-STAR and in the career workshop?
I think part of it we have to wait and see what happens, but I think there are plans, suggested action items with respect to network that can be followed. One of them, the engagement, ongoing engagement of the community on online discussions on those thematic issues that we talked about, and the webinars. I think the ongoing engagement of individuals and organizations may be in the answer to your question. If not, please explain that.
I guess to be more specific, when I say working, I mean literally working in those fields.
I think you're referring to internship then.
Possibly, but hopefully not free internships.
Yes, yes. So once you have the network, you have the pool of expertise. You know where the resources are. You know where the demands are. You know what's the requirements, what's the need. That there are the immediately community can have a needs assessment and can mobilize the forces, the individuals, the talent from one place to another place. So that's the whole idea of network, that mobilization of resources from one place to another place. And by resources, I mean talent, ideas, individuals, even funding from organizations, because you know the landscape. Everybody's connected, plugged into that landscape, and everybody know what's happening. The map is detailed, and everybody has the full information and connected.
Well, if I can just add, I think the mentors. Is this thing on? Is it on? Mentors are intended to be part of that equation as well. Hopefully, mentors will be able to open doors for their mentees, if we can call them that, and help them find work in the areas that they'd like to work in.
Anne, quickly.
Yeah, to organize things like thematic conferences and seminars and roundtables throughout the year, you're going to need people. And I'm wondering if anybody else here is thinking about how to mobilize that network of people that you're going to need.
Yes, we need more volunteers.
You are all champions.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I think that the plan, in the resourcing in the plan, does call for an events person and a director of programs, so that there are the resources, as there are with this event. This event, although it's been based primarily on volunteers, that there would be some staff resources who would actually do that mobilization. But I don't think that there is any intent to lose the volunteers out of it, because I believe that that's part of the magic of this conference. And so I doubt very much that Mehrdad or anybody else on the steering committee intended to lose the volunteers.
Please.
Hi, Alison Hebbs with the Canadian Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences. I just wanted to get back to the advocacy lobbying point, and I have to agree with how you both answered the question, and I do agree that one of the most powerful things is to have a forum like this help a lot of evidence and thoughtful information bubble up, and then that can be carried forward by other groups who have lobbying as their mandate. So my question goes back, and you even identified it. I heard Gary Goodyear twice say, I look forward to the results of this conference. So what are the plans to package what happens here and to show momentum year after year going forward?
Okay, that's a great segue to close off this session. And what I'm going to suggest, Alison, is get Mehrdad up here to sort of wrap up and answer your question directly. But I can tell you that before I do wrap up, I want to thank you all for your attention, for your patience, for your comments, constructive, all of them. And we do appreciate your feedback. And as I said, you are all in some way or other champions and ambassadors for the CSPC, since we've got you captive here. And I want to thank our panelists who have been here. Peter Hackett had to leave a bit early, but Chris and Andre for participating on this advisory and steering committee that we've had a great time. And Mehrdad, I want to thank you in particular for your leadership and your patience for putting up with some of us strange individuals who deal with science policy. So please, Mehrdad, let me bring you up here to say final words and address Alison.
One of the discussions that we had for the awards on science, awards of excellence in science policy, in our original plan, there were 3 categories: one, lifetime achievement, mid-careers, and then youth prize. And the immediate nomination was Paul Dufour for lifetime achievement for the biggest prize. Anyway, thank you, Paul. And I have to thank you for your patience and others. And Andre, I think he's out of business because he just has to take his time and answer my emails during the day. And thank you, Andre, for all the support. Well, a couple of things. Number one, let me deny allegation of affairs. Was mentioned at the beginning of the session. Number two is, so that's an excellent question. Thank you, Alison, for that. We recorded the sessions and they will be posted on the website. That's number one. And will be some of them in the format of the podcast and the other ones in the video recording, plus the interviews. They have the Mark News people. Thanks to them, they conducted, I guess, 20 interviews with different individuals on various issues related to science policy, and they will be posted on the website. And at every conference, we have a proceeding book in which the summarized report of the sessions will be published. There is a 2-page summary of every session, including the discussions that happened, will be published. And hopefully another thing that we can do this year, I'm hoping for that, I don't promise, but is in bullet point, the 5 take-home message of every session can be included in addition to that 2-page summary. That's another one. But the third one, I guess, is the whole impact of CSPC, and that is, to my view, the most important one, community mobilization, something that we have been able to do, and we would like to keep these connections and turn it to you and ask for your support in various ways. It was mentioned, Chris mentioned that in every aspect of operation that you can think of, we need help. In-kind support, financial support, human resource support, and IT support. And if your organizations is willing to provide that support, certainly we recognize that, and you can become part of that membership model. And if you want to take this proposal and upgrade it to another version 2 and 3, by all means, we would love that. And I think that's all I had to say. Did I cover everything? Yes, okay. So on that note, so let me thank you, first of all those people who were involved in this effort, especially volunteers. Another big round of applause for volunteers who worked on this effort.